Hi, I'm Warren Sprouse here on the Bible Forum. It's November 4, 2018. And I have an article. It's probably under the heading of a Sunday sermon, but it's not heavily fortified with Bible verses and the like. But the principles are there. And I've entitled it, The Issue of Sin in the Species. There are very few people in the world who were not thoroughly shocked last week when a man walked into a synagogue on a Sabbath day and started shooting everybody in sight. We were shocked by this wanton destruction where people had gathered to worship God. We are shocked when men kill their children and their wives, bury them in a field, and then feign remorse and shock at their so-called abduction, only to find out later that they were the culprits. Or when men and women spend huge amounts of money to change the way they look, from men to women or from women to men, having the surgeries to make it look as real as possible. And we're more shocked when they insist on being addressed by their new gender identity. And even more shocked when seemingly sane people, doctors, psychologists, preachers, and others go along with this nonsense. What's going on? Well, what's going on is what has always been going on. And that is that this world is moving toward moral, spiritual, and physical disaster and demise. Why? Because of sin. Sin is a corrupter. Sin is a destructor. And sin was permitted into the system and into human beings back at the beginning. Now, the idea of sin in the Bible is that of transgression, a violation of law, a violation of command, a violation of duty. Specifically, it's the transgression of God's revealed word. God has brought forth, thus saith the Lord. You deliberately ignore it, you transgress against it, you violate it, it's called a sin. But generally, all violation of known laws, rules, social, moral, legal, in our world are also sins. Initially, according to the Bible, it had to do with eating the fruit of one particular tree in the garden that God had provided for these people. As the Bible is read, we find the most common idea for sin is that of an offense, followed by missing the mark. Those are the two most dominant definitions for the word that is translated sin. Today we've become accustomed to the idea of sin. It is a very real and present burden for those who care. How many times do we feel sorry for what we've said or thought or felt? How many times have we felt sorry that we cannot do what pleases God every day, every time? That's something that plagues the average true Christian. But it plagues others as well, people who have been raised with an objective sense of right and wrong. When they know they have done wrong, it bothers them. But in the general population, even in the so-called Christian America, it's an idea that is being slowly eroded. Some of the most ungodly people in this world will stand in front of a camera or stand in front of you and insist that they are Christians, or at least good people, despite the testimony of their life, and at the same time spouting all sorts of vile terminology and or living in what the Bible calls sin, and they never once become aware of the irony of all that. What's wrong? The Bible answer to that question is the sin nature. That natural inclination to do wrong that all of us were born with. Yes, babies sin. Not knowingly at those very young ages, but they sin just the same. They do it when they act in selfish ways. Well, they don't know. Doesn't matter. When they throw a temper tantrum. Temper tantrums are usually deliberate efforts to get their own way. When they strike out at others, wanting to hurt that other person, either physically or emotionally. I hate you! But parents look at them and say, well, they don't really know what they're doing. I would agree if they're no more than a couple of months old. But a 6-month-old child knows exactly what they're doing. And they very often know that what they're doing is wrong. Now, that assumes they have parents who are actually parenting them, which is becoming less and less real. At very young ages, mothers will tell their babies to stop that. That the baby does not stop that is where sin comes in. Not doing what we're told, not obeying authority, not caring that you may be hurting someone, insisting on having what you want, regardless of who has it or who needs it, screaming as though you're injured when you're just simply trying to manipulate your mom and dad. And all of that is normal for all human beings. But it was not always that way. There was a time, God tells us, when people didn't do things like this. When was that? In the Garden of Eden. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 31, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the 6th day. That was the day everything was good, meaning godly, right, in harmony with our God. Good, beautiful, best, better, bountiful, cheerful, at ease, fine, good, graciously, joyful, kindly, loving, merry, pleasant, pleasing, precious, sweet, well-favored. Everything? Everything. And then it changed. Sin entered the system. We're told in Genesis chapter 3 that Lucifer, the devil, the fallen archangel of light, had become the prince of darkness due to his own selfishness, his own sin, the sin of rebellion. And all sin is a form of rebellion. He sought to rise above that place where God created him to be. And in so doing, he manifested, he acted out the pride that was in his own heart. A pride that told him that he was just as good as God, maybe better. That he could do what God did. That he could rule and reign over the universe just as good or better than God. We read about it in Isaiah chapter 14. verses 13 and 14. Thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. In every assertion came the I will. And that's the essence of sin. Whether it's Satan or whether it's me. Now keep in mind the ease with which Satan got Eve to partake of the forbidden fruit. It was called forbidden fruit because God had forbidden it. Or so Adam had told her. You see, Eve did not hear this prohibition from God. She heard it from her husband. And when Adam is brought into the narrative in Genesis chapter 3, instead of standing up and saying no, he follows her leadership. She ate it and handed it to him. And he did too. Now, there are several issues here. One is, as I already mentioned, Eve did not receive the prohibition from God. But apparently Adam had told her about it because she knew that we ought not to eat that. When she offered the fruit to Adam, the text merely says that she merely handed it to him, meaning that he may have been standing there the whole time, waiting to see what would happen to her. We don't know. But there's no record of her searching for Adam, calling to it. No, she just handed it to him. And when they sinned, when they did the only thing they could do in rebellion against God, they immediately knew things had changed. The Bible says their eyes were opened, meaning that they now saw what they had done as sin. Reality struck. But they also saw that they were naked before one another. They'd never noticed that before. And the implications are both ironic and dramatic. They were changed in a moment on the inside. And as one result, they saw the other in a different light and were immediately ashamed, something they'd never experienced before. Shame, guilt, fear, embarrassment. All of these new experiences, new feelings. But what was the extent of that change? It was not what God did in driving them out of the garden, making them forage for their own food and so forth. But rather it was in the men who were born to them, their children, Cain and Abel. The narrative tells us that the time came when they were expected to offer sacrifice to God on their own behalf. They had come of age. Some assume that that time of coming of age was the same for both. The narrative doesn't make a distinction, which means they may have been twins. But the text doesn't go that far. Only that each son reached an age in years when they were to stand on their own before God. No doubt Adam told them about it. You got to do this on your own, guys, from now on. And each one offered a sacrifice. Cain's was not accepted because it was of this earth, and the earth was corrupted. He was a gardener. He was fruits and vegetables guy, and he offered the best of what he had. But it was of the earth. Abel's sacrifice was accepted, primarily because it's what God had prescribed. It was blood from an innocent lamb. Something Cain knew. He'd lived in his father's house and seen it many times. He knew. he was rebelling against God. And in these two men, we see the breakdown of people throughout the world and down through the ages. Men, women of the earth versus men and women of God. So what does it take to obey God? It takes a desire that transcends personal desire. Why? Well, because we are innately sinners. Sin is indigenous to our nature. The word sin means missing the mark. And you don't have to miss it by a mile. You can miss it by just a hair. A miss is as good as a mile, is what they say. When Cain's offering was rejected, God spoke to Cain, saying, "Why are you angry? And why is your countenance fallen?" Genesis 4:7. The implication is it doesn't have to be this way. God went on to say, if you do well, if you offer the proper sacrifice, will you not be accepted? And the obvious answer was yes. However, God said, if you do not well, then sin, the offense, lieth at the door, the opening place, and unto thee shall be his desire. Implying that this is a being, not just simply a feeling. It's a condition, apparently, that is signaled to the enemy of your soul that you're fair game. And the implication was here, if you do not do well, he will have you. Now, it's that simple. Either you will take charge and not do what he wants, or he will have control over you. A little, in certain ways, at first, but in time, without knowing it, you will be moving in his direction. Sin will be your natural desire, natural inclination. As you age, you won't even notice just how far you've moved. You won't notice how far you are moving away from God's holy standards. It's about not paying attention. It may be about not being able to see it. It's about following the physical, the earthly patterns. At heart, you will be convinced that you're a good person because you can name any number of people that are worse than you. You don't lie. You don't cheat. You don't steal. You don't cuss. You don't fornicate or murder people. But you do rebel against authority. Don't like to be told what to do. You do cut the corners. You do tell people how you feel about what they're saying and doing. You do lie about your homework or where you've been. You do watch things you know you shouldn't. You do listen to music that stimulates your senses in destructive ways. And you sneak things. You rebel against authority. You don't tell the whole truth. In short, as you age, unless you're paying attention and being proactive, you are conditioned toward sin, exercising little or no resistance toward it incrementally. And the reason is because that's how you've been made. You are a son, a daughter of Adam and Eve. It's part of your DNA. In what we call Western civilization, these tendencies have been addressed in our legal documents and in our moral standards. Here in the United States, our laws are influenced by and oriented toward God's absolute standards of morality, at least the first 100 years or so. Much is made of our slave history during these years, something decidedly not biblical. The Bible clearly speaks out against slavery. Because of this slave history, critics tell us that these United States were never godly, that they were always ungodly, and they are even now. But the truth is, our founding fathers made a pact with the devil, as it were. In order to keep the southern states in the Union, which was important at the beginning, the issue of slavery was set aside. Check the documents. They were aware of it. They didn't like it. They didn't want it. But if they made a point, wouldn't get the southern states to side with them, the weakness would have destroyed them. Read the documents, the letters. You'll see that the goal of our government was always to deal with it later. And true to what the founders knew, the issue split the Union. The war to bring the Confederate States back into the Union was bitter. It threatened everything they had built, everything we were at that time. And in the hearts of some, it's a wound that has never healed. But the truth is that Western civilization, as a phrase, as a term, is a euphemism for biblical government, a form of biblical government. Our Declaration of Independence starts out with it, saying we hold these truths to be self-evident. Like what? Like that all men are created equal. Where does it say that? Bible. That as such they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, rights you can't take away from them. And that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit, not the actual guarantee. And this word happiness in their vocabulary was not happy giddy. It had more to do with the ability to act out and accomplish whatever you had in mind. We are married by Christian clergy and buried by the same. Family is the building block of society. One man, one woman, in holy matrimony until death separates us. These are Bible ideas. Our children were educated in schools where the Bible was one of the textbooks and where they learned to read according to a system called phonics and used biblical principles to illustrate. They learned the letter A, and they learned that in Adam's fall we sinned all. It's how you pronounce the letter A. And they learned to pray in school. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray thee, Lord, my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray thee, Lord, my soul to take. They learned these things in school. Benjamin Harris's 1690 New England Primer. In my day, we started every day in school with a reading from the Bible, a paragraph or so from the Old Testament, because there were Jews in our community and in the country. And then there was the recitation of the Lord's Prayer, followed by the salute to the flag, which, when I was in school, got changed with the phrase "under God" added to it. The United States, however, was never fully Christian. But it was founded on Christian principle. And because of this, we understood what sin was. We understood what evil was. As men rose up who would not live by the law, we stood up against those people. And every American knew they were safe in their homes and in their neighborhoods because, generally speaking, every American shared the same values. When I was a child, people didn't lock the doors in their houses even at night. They could go on vacation and maybe not lock the door. when I was a kid, cars had keys in them. My dad had a 49 Chevy. You didn't even need a key. You needed a key to unlock it, but then it had a little toggle at the bottom and you just get in and move it. And you never thought about anybody taking the car. There were exceptions, but largely in the cities. There were exceptions in what we now call the robber barons of industry. And then World War I, that opened the door for ordinary men to see that kind of carnage, that kind of evil, and to see Europe. Experiences that changed many a heart. And we sang the song, how you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris? Prohibition came in about that time, introducing the average person to organized crime. It's on the radio, in the movies. The movies glorified it. The newspapers loved it. And as a nation, we were changing. And then came the Great Depression, and that didn't help. After World War II, men who fought in that war, men who grew up during the Great Depression with little or nothing, found themselves in an economic boom. They could get good jobs, make money. Jobs were plentiful. The pay was good. Sears and Roebuck was selling prefab houses. They delivered them to your house for $6,000. That was a lot of money in those days, about 2 years' salary probably or more. And Levittowns were growing up all over the Northeast. Life was good. But it was about to change forever. No one anticipated a time when young people would have as much freedom as they do today. Freedom without restraint. Instant communication with anyone they choose, whenever they choose. A window on the world, 24 hours a day. The uncontrolled world of cell phones and tweets, where they would be exposed to all sorts of things they're not ready to fully understand. And the result of all of this, a society without a culture. Families without communal values. Communities that are more digital than physical. Churches that have become entertainment, and debt no one could ever have imagined. Looking around, we are hard-pressed to understand why so many people have so many disparate ideas and values, why so many people have so much time to spend on the streets in protest of one thing or another, why so many don't seem to have any roots or any real community, and why there is so much violence. And the common answer on the superficial level is that we are no longer a neighborhood. We are no longer a common society. We are now 360 million different people interacting with whatever presents itself at the moment. Facebook, Twitter, and a host of newer social media outlets have become our reality. So now a man can walk into a Jewish synagogue and simply kill a bunch of people he doesn't even know for nothing more than they're Jewish. Or send a homemade bomb to people he doesn't agree with politically. And the rest of us are shocked. We're shocked because we've never lived like this before. But the rest of the world has. And it has been often far worse. What's the difference? We lived above it because of our biblical base. A base that has been eroded. You know what shocks me? It shocks me that there are so many more who would never do anything remotely like this. In a world where God is a dirty word and where church is nothing more than entertainment or mystical asceticism, it's a wonder anybody has their head on straight and their heart oriented toward God. But they do. And because of this, the world has not yet spiraled completely out of control. God is still at work in the hearts of men and women, calling out a people for his own name's sake, working his plan, following his timetable. And all of that will continue until he, God, says it's enough. Are you one of God's children? Or are you a child of the world? Have you looked at your own heart and your own life and said, this isn't good. This isn't right. And have you got down on your knees and prayed to God to show you what is? And in seeing what is, have you repented, turned your back on the nonsense, and embraced what God has provided? God has provided escape. Through the sacrifice and the blood of another, he has washed away sin, taken it out of the equation. And all those who entrust their heart, their life, their very being, and all that is their future to God through the Lord Jesus Christ will live forever. Thankfully, not here on this earth, in this condition, but with God. Are you saved? You don't know? Find somebody and ask them. You can't find anybody? Shoot me an email. We'll talk.